Haboim, welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Pei Dalid Amud Beis. Starting Daf Pei Dalid Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the bottom. The Gemara now discusses the Isser, the prohibition min HaTorah, to break the bone of the Korban Pesach. Says the Gemara, bring a brayta Tanu Rabbanon. Ve'etzem lo tishbru boy. You shall not break the bone of the Korban Pesach. Boy, Bekosher v'loy beposel. The Tanakama darshans boy to the exclusion of that which is posel. Rabbi says, and he brings the posuk. I'll read the entire posuk. Bebayis echad ye ochel. In one bayis, the Korban Pesach shall be eaten. Lo toitzi min habayis min habasar chutza. Do not bring out the basar from that bayis. Ve'etzem lo tishbru boy. And the end of the posuk states, and the bone of the Korban Pesach shall not be broken. So here Rabbi explains, Bebayis echad ye ochel. The first part of the pasuk states that the basar should be eaten in the bayis and not should be taken out. Ve'etzem lo tishbur boy. And the end of the pasuk says, and the bone, the Korban Pesach, should not be broken. So he learns one from the other. Kol haroy la'achila yesh boy mishum shviras etzem v'she'ein roy la'achila ein boy mishum shviras etzem. That which is roy has to be fitting to be eaten. Then there's a prohibition of breaking the bone. But if it's not roy to be eaten, then Rebbe says, then there's no prohibition of breaking the bone. So we have a machlokes between Rebbe and the Tanakama. Ask the Gemara, wait a second, if it's something that is not kosher, it's posel, then you cannot eat it. So then what is the difference between the two opinions? Tanakama anyway said it has to be kosher, and if it's not, if it's posel, then there's no prohibition. Rebbe said it has to be roy la'achila. So what's the difference between the two opinions between the Tanakama and Rebbe? Says Gemara, my beinayu, what's the difference? Ika beinayu, Rabbi Yirmiyahu, Pesach haba betuma ika beinayu. Rabbi Yirmiyahu is the first opinion of many that suggests the difference between the two opinions is in regards to when the Korban Pesach, where the tzibur, either roiv or certainly if all of the tzibur has tumas hames. That's going to be the difference between the two opinions as follows. Laman da omar kosher, the one who says kosher, namely the Tanakama, on top of Bey Dalad Amud Beis, at the very top, Hai posulhu. Laman da omar roy la'achila, Hai nami roy la'achilahu. The opinion says roy la'achila, since we say that when there is a tzibur that is tamei meis, still they go ahead and eat the Korban Pesach, so it's roy la'achila. According to that man, the Omar, it's roy la'achila, and therefore be prohibited to break the Korban Pesach's bone. But the Tanakama that says that has to be kosher, here it's possible. Take a look at Rashi to explain that over here, since it's only dechuya, technically it's possible. Only the Torah says that in such a situation, they're yoytze yidei chayvasoi, even in a state of tuma. Says Rashi, the very top, Hai posulhu she nesa bepsul. The Korban Pesach was done in a state of psul. It was posul. The tuma dechuya hu betzibur, because it's only dechuya, the tuma. Elo shekan gzeras hakosu lepoitrim boy. But the Torah has a special gzeras hakosu teaching me that those who then partake in this, the tzibur who's in a state of tuma, they are yoytze yidei chayvasam. So al-kapanim, this would be the difference. Rav Yosef Omar, Rav Yosef argues, and he says, Ki hai gavna, in such a case, kuli almo ein boy mishim shviras hap etzem. Everybody would agree there's not a prohibition of breaking the bone of the Korban Pesach. The Rebbe la'akule ko'osi v'hai ha'posulhu. Rebbe was coming to be mekil. Now there's Rebbe himself, he agrees of the drasha and therefore understands that there's an exclusion over here. Only that which is kosher is going to be something that there will be a prohibition of breaking the bone. If it's possible, not. Only Rebbe came to add on to the Tanakama and said it has to also be roy la'achila. And therefore, according to the opinion that we just saw, this opinion is saying, which is authored by Rebbe Yirmiyahu, that Rebbe is being machmir. So Rav Yosef's taina is that Rebbe is only going to be makil, and therefore this is not, according to everybody, going to be valid. Everybody will say, in such a situation, since it's posul, then there's no prohibition of breaking the bone. Elo haisa lo ishas hakoisha. V'nifsal ika benayu. Rather, Rav Yosef says that we're talking about a case where it had a shas hakoisha and then it became posul. In other words, the avodah of the Korban Pesach was valid, then it became, let's say, tamei. That's the difference. Leman da'omer kosher, according to Tana Kama, that's kosher. Ha kosher, and therefore there's a breakage of the bone. It's an iser. However, leman da'omer roi la'achila Rebbe, ha hashta lav roi la'achilahu, because now it's tamei. So this opinion of Rav Yosef and all the ensuing opinions will learn that Rebbe is indeed being makil. Abaye Omar, however, Abaye argues on Rav Yosef's approach. And he says, Kuli alma ki gavna ein boy mishum shmiras ha'etzem. Everyone would agree in this case that there's no isur of shmiras ha'etzem. My taima, what's the reason? Because hashta mias ha-posulu. Because even if they had a kshas ha-kosher, but right now it is posul. And since right now it is posul, therefore, there's not going to be a prohibition of breaking the bone. This is be'etzem machlokes tanoim. But this is the taina that Abaye explains. Elo, says Abaye, what is the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rebbe? He explains as follows. Elo shviras ha'etzemi ba'oyoim ike benayu. Abaye explains their machlokes is based on breaking the bone on Yudalid Benisan itself. In other words, that's when the carbon is brought, and it's only eaten at night on the Tesvov. So if it's broken on Yudal, that's the machlekes. As follows: Laman da'omar kosher, according to Tanakam, that's kosher. Ha kosher, it's valid, it's kosher, and therefore it'd be an iser of breaking the bone. Laman da'omar roi la'achila, but Rebbe, according to Rebbe, who says that has to be roi la'achila. Hash to lav barachilahu, since it's only during the day and it's only supposed to be eaten at night. It's not barachila, and therefore there's no iser of breaking the bone. Meisvei, the Gemara now challenges the shita of Abaye by the following brisa. Rebbe states, Nimnin al moyach sheberoish, the group of that are included, that are accounted in the group of the Korban Pesach, they can be counted with the roish, the moyach sheberoish, ve'nimna al moyach shebakulis. They can be included in the moyach, the marrow of the roish, of the head of the Korban Pesach, to be included in their, each one getting a kazayas of bosar. However, not of the moyach, the marrow of the thigh bone. Now, what's the difference? The Gemara itself explains. Al moyach sheberosh my taima. What's the reason why Moshe Barosh they could be included in the Korban Pesach? Because since one can take out and extract that marrow from the roish, thereby it's going to be valid to allow each person his chelek of that bosar, of that moyach. However, when it comes to the thigh bone, the only way to extract the moyach is by breaking the bone. And therefore, it would not be valid to include the chabura with such moyach. So the Gemara says, V'isal kedaita is now challenging Abaye based on this brisa. V'isal kedaita shviras ha'etzem. And if you, Abaye, want to say that the breaking of the bone on Erev Pesach and Yudalid would be valid according to the one who says that it has to be Roy La'achila, namely Rebbe, Roy La'achila, and here it's not Roy La'achila because it's Miboid Yoim, then Kulis Nami. Then you should say that when it comes to Kulis also, the thigh bone also. Why? Because Nisbarei Miboid Yoim, break it mi ba'oid yoim, then you can go ahead and break that thigh bone, because there's no prohibition according to the shita of Rebbe that you're suggesting. And then extract the marrow, whereby the chabur will be able to then be included in such marrow, the marrow of the thigh bone, since there's no prohibition of breaking the bone on Erev Yom Tif, on Yudale ben Nisan. Omar lach Abai. Abai responds, it's not a kasha on me. Why? Because according to your reasoning, also at nightfall, then let's say you take a piece of coal, and then put it onto the bone, and let it let it burn it, and then take out the moyach. In other words, let it make a hole in the bone and extract the moyach. And then you can account people to be a chabura for such marrow. The Tanya, because it states in the Brisa, aval hasareif be'atzamois. When you burn the bone and you make a hole in it and you extract, let's say, the moyach, it's not considered to be breaking of the bone. So therefore, that should be then the method that should be done as well, even at night. Elamai isloch lemei. Why is it not done? Says Abai, because there's a rabbinic problem. Abai amar mishum pekah, because it might come to crack when you go ahead and put the heat on the bone. Instead of making a hole, it actually will crack the bone. And since it's a chashash that you might crack the bone, Rava Omar Mishum, that's Abai's explanation. Rava Mishum Hefsei Kochim, the Komafsi Lebiodayim. He says, Rava, that you will then take the Kochim, that means a part of it will be then ruined, be nifsad, and that's done biyadayim, and that's prohibited. Dilma ochel nura min bayach didei, because perhaps the heat, the fire, will then consume some of that moyach, and you'll be then destroying that moyach biyadayim. Akoponim, we see over here that midrabanan is a problem. There's a chashash. So mi boydionami. Also, when it comes to erev Pesach and Yudalid benisan, why can't you go ahead and extract and break the bone of the thigh bone to extract the moyach? Because you might come to then go ahead and do so at night. So therefore, midrabanan, they made it ulcer. So it's not a kasha on me why it can't be done, because indeed there's a rabbinic, there's an isser d'rabbanan. So that is the shita of Abai, that on erev Pesach there'll be a machlokes between the Tanakam and Rebbe. The Tanakam will say that it is kosher, whereby there will be a prohibition of breaking the bone, whereas according to Rebbe, there's no Isser because not Roy La'achila. Rapapa says that's not a valid machlokes. Why? He would say, Kol ki agavne kuli ama yesh ba mishum shvias ha'etzem. Everybody would agree in such a case, when it's mi boy yoim, that there is yes, the Isser of shvias ha'etzem. My time, why? Because la'orta mechsi la'achila. Granted, right now it's not the zman of achila, but since it's going to be roy la'achila, one can eat it at night. So right now also there'll be a prohibition of breaking the bone. Elo says Rav Papa be'ever sheyotze miksasa kamifli. Rather, what is the machlok between the Tanakam and Rebbe? That's when a part of the aver goes out of the wall of Yushalayim. Since Korban Pesach is kachim kalim, it's not allowed to go outside of the wall of Yushalayim. So if entire aver would go out, certainly then that would be something that would not have a problem of breaking the bone. But if part of the aver goes out, there's a machlokes as follows: Man the omer kosher, ha kosher hu. The man the omer says is kosher, since there's meat that goes till the end of the bone, so then that would be kosher, and therefore there would be a problem of breaking the bone. Uman the omer roy la'achila. But the other opinion, according to Rabbi, that says roy la'achila, hayla barachilahu. There's not going to be barachila over here, and therefore be a problem. Kedetanya Rabbi Shmuel ben Osha Rabbi Yechim ben Berka Omer. Aver sheyatz miktsasa ushvoroi. If part of the aver goes out of the designated place, namely outside of the wall of Yushalayim, if it's kachek kalim, then ain boy mishum shvias ha'etzem. There's not going to be a problem of shvias ha'etzem. So that's the shita of Rebbe. And that's how Rav Papa learns the machlokes. Rav Sheishes b'rei Rav Idi Omar. He says also this is not going to be a valid way of explaining the machlokes. Why? Because kol ki agavne kuli ama ein boy mishum shvias ha'etzem. Everybody would agree, including Rebbe, that when mitzvahs aver goes outside of the wall of Yishalayim, then there is no shviras ha'etzem, there's no prohibition. The high aver ha posul. Why? Because the aver itself is posul. So therefore, since it's posul, therefore there's not going to be a prohibition in Isser. Elo rather shviras ha'etzem beno ika benayhu. Rather, Rav Sheshes, Breder Rav Idi explains the machlek is to be based on when you partially roast the carbon Pesach. Man domer kosher ha kosher, because it's still kosher, and therefore it's going to be something that would be is osir to then break the bone. Uman domer roy la'achila. It's not roy la'achila because it has to be roasted, and it's only partially. Hashda ain't a roy la'achila, and therefore there's no prohibition. Rav Nachem bar Yitzchak Omar, he says also this is not a valid way of explaining the machlekes. Why? Because everybody would hold in this case, even if it's just partially roasted, that there is a prohibition of breaking the bone. My time, why? Because the hochazi la'achila, because it is fitting to be eaten, and right now, granted, it's partially roasted, but the mat vele va'achile, you can merely roast it, and then everybody would be able to eat it. So therefore, everybody would agree over here there is a problem of breaking the bone. Ella, therefore, he explains, shviras ha'aliyah ika benayhu. Rather, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says the breaking the bone specifically of the tail of the keves, that itself is the machlokes over here. Leman da omar kosher, according to the Tanakama, ha kosher, it's valid, and therefore there's a breakage of the bone would be in Isser. But Leman da omar roy la'achilo hay ein roy la'achilo. Why? Because the alil legavoya salka, this part of the animal, this part of the keves, which is a fatty type of tail, it's a different type of tail than the other types of animals. This is brought up on the Mizbeach. And therefore, it's not roy la'achila, whereby there's no Isser breaking the bone. Rav Ashi also takes issue with this mahalach. Kol ki gavno. In this case, vade ein boy mishum shviras ha'etzem. There's no Isser in shviras ha'etzem, even of the aliyah. Why? The hovadai ain't a roy la'achila klal. Even fundamentally, the Tanakam would agree it's not roy la'achila, and therefore there will be no prohibition. Elo avesh ein alav kazayis basar ikven. Rather, what is the machlekes? Explains Rav Ashi that the aver does not have a kazayis of basar. Leman do omar kosher. So ha kosher. The Tanakhama says then it would be a prohibition of breaking the bone because it is still kosher. Leman do omar roy la'achila ba'inan shir achila veleka. Since you don't have a full kazayis, therefore is not going to then be included in breaking the bone. It's not roy la'achila. Ravina Omar, Ravina takes issue with Rav Ashi's mahalach. And he says, in this case, there is no shviras ha'etzem. Why? Because you need to have a kazayis of basar. And therefore, if there's no kazayis of basar on such a bone, therefore there's no breakage of no isur breaking the bone. Ella, rather, Ravina says, Eivish ein alav kazayis basar b'mokom zeh. However, yesh alav kazayis basar b'mokom acher ikbenayu. In this place, there's not a kazayis basar, but there is a kazayis basar in another mokom. That's the machlekes. Leman the omar kosher, the Tanakama who says kosher, then ha kosher, it would be valid, and therefore it would be in isser of breaking the bone. Leman the omar roy la achila, but in shir achila mokom shvira b'haleka. He would say that over here you don't have the isser breaking the bone because you have to have the kazayis of basar in that mokom, and you don't have that, and therefore there's no isser. Now the Gemara brings, after speaking about 8 different opinions, it brings a brisa that supports at least 4 of them. Says the Gemara, Tanya ki arba minayu. We have a brisa that supports 4 of the 8 opinions. The Tanya Rabbi Omer. Rabbi says, and he brings the pasuk, bebayis echad ye'ochel ve'etzem lo tishburu boy. It's a little bit confusing because when we quoted before, this is the pasuk that the Tanakama this is the pasuk that Rabbi brought, but the way it's brought is a little bit different. The pasuk states that in one bias it shall be eaten, and then it brings in the sefer the same pasuk that you should not break the bone. So here, the way it's quoted in Rebbe, ala kosher hu chayiv ve'eno chayiv ala posel. Here it's a little bit confusing because that was the way it was stated in the opinion of the Tanakama, and Rebbe was choylek based on this pasuk. So the Rishonim say that over here that Rebbe was not dak, but he does mean the same thing that he meant before, that not only does it have to be kosher, it also has to be roy la'achila based on the pasuk that he brought in the juxtaposition between the Reisha and the Seifa, where the Reisha says it has to be eaten in one house, and the Seifa says you shall not break the bone. Now the Brisa, it brings the 4 different opinions that we saw earlier. Haisa loy sha'as ha-kosher, if it had a time that it was still kosher, v'nivsal, and then it became possible. In other words, there was the avodah, the Korban Pesach was valid, then it became nitma. B'sha'as achila ein boy mishum shviras etzem. Right, b'nizal b'sha'as achila ein boy mishum shviras etzem. And this was Rav Yosef's opinion, meaning to say that it's not going to have shviras etzem according to Rebbe. Yesh boy shir achila. The second opinion that we saw. Yesh boy shir achila. If there is a shir of achila v'kazayis, yesh boy mishum shiras etzem. Ein bo shira achila, ein bo mishum shiras etzem. This would be either Ravina or Rav Ashi, whether you learn it's in one place, or you learn that if even it's not in one place, but it can be in another place. Al kopanim, in such a situation, then it will have shiras etzem or not, depending on the opinion of either Ravina or Rav Ashi. Haroy lemizbeach, the third opinion, that which is fitting for the Mizbeach, ein boy mishum shviras ha'etzem. If it's fitting for the Mizbeach, then it's not going to be shviras ha'etzem. There's not going to be a prohibition, and therefore the aliyah, the bone of the aliyah, so that if that's broken, so since the aliyah is brought on the Mizbeach, then Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok says it's not going to then be brought. It's not going to be included in the prohibition of breaking the bone, because it goes up entirely on the Mizbeach. The fourth opinion, what we saw above, is B'shas achila yesh boy mishum shviras etzem. Shelo b'shas achila ein bo mishum shviras etzem. This is Abaye's opinion, said that on Erev Pesach, he says that if over here, since on Erev Pesach not the shas of achila, Rebbe would say that there's no prohibition of breaking the bone. And therefore, the Brisa states at least four different opinions. We're not sure if one is Ravina or the other one was Rav Ashi, but Al Kapanim, it's 4 of the 8 opinions that we saw above included in this Brisa itself in the Shita of Rebbe.